Hey everybody, it's Avi Tenenbaum here in beautiful Yerushalayim with a new TFRP. I want to tell you today a short but very integral idea when it comes to Emunah. And the idea is we often believe what we feel. So there's an important book from Reb Elchonon Wasserman, and he was killed in the Holocaust. He was a prime student of the Chavetz Chaim, and he has beautiful, deep writings. So he has a book about the end of days called Ikvasa de Mashiach, and it talks about politics and what might happen in the end of days. And then he has a book, Kobetz Sheurim, that's in Gemara. So he has a book, Kobetz Ma'amarim, which is his essays about various theological topics. And in the very first piece, he talks about Emunah, faith. He observes how when the Torah talks about, in Kriya Shema, Loisasuru acharei levavchem, do not stray after your heart, va'acharei einechem, and after your eyes. So we know that if you look at something that you shouldn't, that will be arousing, and then you'll want it, it will influence you, and then you're going to go do bad things, right? So we can understand why the Torah says in Kriya Shema, Loisasuru acharei einechem, don't stray after your eyes. I got that, okay. But why does it say, Loisasuru acharei levavchem, don't stray after your heart? Your heart is here, right? It should say, Loisasuru acharei mochachem, you should not stray after your brain, your mind, your thoughts. So what's this connection to the heart? And that's what he's trying to address in the essay. So he says a very groundbreaking idea. It's worth quoting all the time. It's one of those ideas that you keep coming back to it. It explains the news. It explains every therapy session. It explains so much. So he says, we have emotions. We have feelings, we have desires, fantasies, biases, and these are things I mention a lot in my videos. And that's okay that we have them because that's part of what makes us a human being. That's not the issue. The issue is that we sometimes lie to ourselves and we pretend as if what we feel is what's true. And we make that the truth, and then we bend the truth around that. And so there's a lot of psychology about this. There's the idea of wishful thinking, for example. You want something, so you will explain to yourself why it's worth the money, right? And I'm not talking about a root canal. We don't usually convince ourselves why we really need one, even though we probably don't. That's a different problem, but we want a new television, and we will grab at any shred of evidence in order to justify why we should buy a new television. Okay? So we are inclined towards our desires, and then we bend the truth to conveniently fit what we want. What does this have to do with therapy? Oh my gosh, it has a lot to do with therapy. I spoke today to a person who they have all sorts of fantasies, and they struggle with running after those fantasies and twisting the whole world around them and basically abandoning their family and their children for this fantasy, or gripping as if their life depended on it to the truth. And recognizing that they have fantasies, which is okay. We said, human beings have fantasies. Hashem sends those to us. That's our Yetzer Hara. That's fine. But that doesn't mean we should now drop everything we're doing, run away, and pursue our fantasies, right? We have to be able to separate the truth from our desires. It's two different things. And then hopefully we will be safe, healthy, and productive that way. So Reb Elchonon says that's why it says in the Torah, Loi sosuru acharei nevavchem. Do not stray after your heart, because your heart is your desires. That's the place where you want stuff. And that's what leads you astray. It's not your mind, it's your heart. And therefore, Reb Elchonon forms a very groundbreaking principle out of this. And he says, if you're not careful, you'll live your entire life not realizing that all of the choices that you've made, or the major choices that you've made, was all around some bent-up, conveniently doctored truth in order to serve your self-fulfilling fantasies. And that is frightening. And so he says, more often than not, the rule is, we are tempted to follow all sorts of ideologies, all sorts of movements, political movements, religious movements, all sorts of things. And we don't realize it's not because we believe in those things, but because it touches on some emotional need of ours. It somehow is convenient for us. So we're looking for an easy way out. We're looking for an easy way to get through life without working too hard, without taking any risks, and without having to, inconvenience ourselves to actually need to change. And so we'll reach for this belief and for that belief and the third belief, and we will conveniently tailor our beliefs around us so that we don't have to do anything, right? So, for example, I could say I don't believe in God, but not for ideological reasons, and not because I'm Stephen Hawking making mathematical equations and arguments to show that, but simply for the reason that if I don't believe in God, then I don't have to give a reckoning, and I don't have to make moral choices, and then I could do what I want. And that's easy. And then I don't have to deal with shame if I made a mistake. I don't have to deal with repentance. I don't have to work on myself and plot a course ahead of me and see how to get to a better place and be a better person, because it makes no difference. Nihilism makes no difference anyways. That's what Reb Elchonon is saying. He's saying that for all the big philosophers out there that claim, I believe this, well, I'm a big believer in that. Reb Elchonon says, usually, you're not a believer in anything other than chasing your fantasies. But you've carefully crafted your beliefs in a way that they serve your desires, fantasies, and indulgence. That's what you've done. And so Reb Elchonon says, don't do that. And that's why the Torah says, don't stray after your heart, because heart refers to your desires. Okay, so it's an amazing, amazing idea. And so the next time you see some sort of cult or extremism, or a person that maybe is throwing off the yoke of Torah and mitzvahs, I'm not saying we should judge them. And a lot of people are going through a lot of pain and suffering. But when you hear people talk about theological decisions based on philosophical conclusions that they claim to have reached, it's generally because it serves a convenient purpose. Now, if I would be in pain, and if I would be lonely and suffering, or inundated with addictive thoughts and fantasies, maybe stuck in a bad marriage, maybe, whatever the circumstance may be, and I'm pushed into some sort of psychological corner where it's hard to even exist every day, and therefore, I'm going to clamor with desperation for some sort of psychological trick to alleviate my pain, and therefore, for example, I will come to a conclusion of throwing off Torah, throwing off mitzvahs, denying God. I understand that. I understand it. That makes sense to me. I'm not saying you should do that. It makes sense to me. However, I will refer us to the last video that we put out together, which was really interesting, and it was all about how God is so beautiful and great and inclusive and understanding and loving that instead of compartmentalizing and throwing God out the window because we're in a corner, we can include him even in the corner. And we may not even be doing what we're supposed to, and it may be hard, and we may be making mistakes. He gets it. He gets it. Let's keep him in the picture and work with him instead of throwing him out the window and flushing him down the toilet. And that's easier said than done. I feel a little bit entitled to talk about this only because I've been in those types of places before where I've had some suffering in my life that put me in a corner. And that corner put me in a place where I could have chosen to throw away my values and throw away my beliefs and then easily dispense with a lot of psychological pain so-called created by my beliefs. Or I could have chosen to deeply hold as tight as I can onto my beliefs, but make some sort of room with compassion and understanding for the struggle that I have. And thank God I chose the latter. And it was not easy. And it's not easy even today sometimes. So I'm coming from an experiential place when I'm talking about this. I remember a bothersome article years ago that was claiming how does it go? They were saying because of the church, we have pornography. As opposed to the opposite. Because of pornography, we need the church. They were saying the opposite. Because we have more moralistic standards and beliefs, that causes shame, which then we rebel back by indulging in taivas and showing that really we're animals and we don't deserve to be shackled to beliefs and morals. Basically, they had it backwards. And there's nothing farther than the truth. And the way the Torah views it is, we're meant to reach for the stars and develop the highest level of Emunah and bitachon and values that we can. It's hard. That creates an opportunity where now I have to sacrifice my desires in order to live in a higher level of existence and be a moralistic person. And I have to face my mistakes and work on myself. Oh gosh, that's hard. Yeah, it is hard, but that's what we're here for. That's what you get paid for. That's the whole beauty of being in this world. And that goes back to that idea. And by the way, if you never watched the first videos of TFRP, all of them were about this. We are part animal, part angel. We have the lower side of ourselves and the higher side of ourselves. And God is not an angry, sniveling, vindictive, punitive God that's stamping his foot, pointing his finger at you and looking to burn you in hell for as long as he can. And he's just waiting for the opportunity to cook you. He's a loving God. He's an understanding God. And he put you in these places to bring out the best in you. And it's an adventure and it's a journey. So yeah, we have desires and confusion and pain, suffering, psychopathology. We have all of that. And we still should try to reach for the stars. And that's what makes us so beautiful and great. That's exactly the whole point. So to go back to the church and pornography, we have pornography and we have morals, and that's the whole beauty, is that we want bad, but we try to do good, and we reconcile that, and we use self-compassion and project compassion of God onto us to let it be okay that we make mistakes sometimes. Don't do them on purpose, but don't let it hold you back. And be the greatest person you can be and formulate strong beliefs in God, and that there's a reckoning, and there's a world to come, and God sees everything that we do, and knows our thoughts, and knows our intentions, and make room for your humanity, and still try your best, as opposed to doing what Reb Elchonon was calling people out on, where they say, oh, this is hard for me, so let me just tailor my beliefs differently so that I don't have to work hard. Guess what, buddy? You're here to work hard. And there's nothing prouder than a person who makes good choices. And he feels good after having been in a corner and it being difficult, and he still, or she still, reaches for the stars and makes the best choices that they can to desperately cling to the morals and standards of spirituality that they hold by. There's nothing that makes you more proud and gives you more self-esteem than that. Okay? So let's have the highest level of Emunah and bitachon. Recognize that we have an animalistic side to ourselves, but not let that doctor up and change our beliefs. And this perfectly segues into what we said last week. That you can be a sinner and you can have great faith. And you can even be a big sinner and have great faith. And don't let it be a contradiction. And don't tailor your beliefs around your taiva. And there are so many movements like that today and mistakes. On a community level and on an individual level. And it's not necessary, and it is a philosophical error. It's just extraneous. Thank you, guys. I'm going to make one more point. The Yud Gimel Midos. I was going to make a whole video on them. The Yud Gimel Ikrim. I'm sorry. I'm just going to say 3 minutes on that and we'll finish. There's something called the Yud Gimel Ikrim. The Yud Gimel, the 13 principles of faith, and they come out from the Rambam amongst other sources. And there's a whole history about exactly these 13 and how they should be worded and how we have to be careful to talk about them. But the idea basically is that there are 13 principles of faith, 13 ideas that come together to create a complete faith. So in the last video, or 2 videos ago actually, when we were talking about what faith is, we were saying all sorts of ideas about what faith is. Let's say that in basketball, football, baseball, you have guidelines, you have like lines that you can only play within those lines. And if you go out of bounds, it's a foul, right? You've left the ballpark, you've left the playing field. And the lines that they paint on the side of the field and on the side of the court help you stay in the game and help show you where to play the game and where to operate best so that when you score, it actually counts. And the 13 principles of faith are like that. You need all 13 ideas that come together to create a full picture that anything short of that picture would not create a faith that will carry you through difficult things in life and will not create a meaningful life and will not get you to where you need to get to. So it's worth looking up on the internet or in a book, in a siddur. They print this in the back of the siddur. A lot of times it's after Shachris, after the morning prayers, the 13 principles of faith. And you'll look at the 13 and you'll see them. I'm not going to say all of them by heart, but for example, one is that God exists. God knows everything that we do, that we think, that we say. He sees, He hears. There's a reckoning for all of our good deeds. He will pay us back. And for our bad deeds, He will punish us. There is an afterlife. There's something called resurrection of the dead, Tchias HaMesim. This Torah is perfect and will never be switched by any other Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu was the biggest prophet and everything he said is true. So you look at the 13 principles of faith, and we needed all of them together and all of those ideas to create the playing field within which you play the game in that place. Those are like the bounds, and you play in bounds, and if you play out of the bounds, it's not going to work well. So it's worth finding out what are the 13 principles of faith. I'm not going to give a whole video on it. I want to finish this before 20 minutes, and maybe we're even going to move soon to a different topic. But working on the 13 principles of faith, which seems not relevant, is relevant. And we need that background and backbone to help us so that our faith is meaningful. Because if I know that God knows everything that I do, then He understands my struggle and He will reward me. And if He knows the bad things that I do, that will be a deterrence for me not to do them, and that will be a motivation for me to go fix my ways. And if you're not healthy enough to find negative motivation, so we should make different videos about that. I used to not be strong enough to hear those things, but today I am, and they help me very, very much. All these ideas come together to make a starting point from which you start there, and from there you work towards wherever you need to get to. The idea that God is one, and God is good, and everything is for the best, and the Torah will never be switched, and it's true. And now something bad happens, for example. So I start from the starting point of God made that happen. Everything God does is for the best. Whatever the Torah says about this event is true. Okay. Let me start from there and work backwards. I'll tell you a story and we'll finish. I remember going to do CPR as a Hatzalah person on a big Talmud Chacham in Yerushalayim who suddenly had a heart attack. And I remember CPR was in progress and there were enough people on scene that they didn't need me medically. So they sent me to the room next door where this Talmud Chacham's wife was sitting and crying and praying and pleading with God for her husband to survive the CPR, which technically you can't survive a CPR. It means you're dead. CPR is when they resurrect a dead person, right? That's basically what it means. But she was praying that it would be successful, which it usually isn't, but maybe it could be, who knows? And I saw dozens at least, I'm not going to say hundreds, but dozens of CPRs and the reaction of family members during CPRs. And that's a very, very surreal, vivid, traumatic, painful place to be and watch. And I saw this woman was a woman of faith. And she wasn't reacting, and it wasn't fake, and it wasn't shallow, and it wasn't without awareness. I could tell in that particular story, from just all the information I was pulling out from her choice of words and mannerisms and the way that she was very, very present, that she was on an extremely high level of faith and from a very, very centered place, which didn't seem dissociated and didn't seem she was in denial, didn't seem like she was pretending to do something because she was socialized to do it in Beis Yaakov, but she was genuinely a person with a very high level of faith. From that place, she was praying. And I said, wow, I wish I can get to a high level of faith like that. I was also a different time in Shaarei Tzedek Hospital. My brother-in-law had a baby, and they live near the hospital, and he runs the meals at the hospital there on Shabbos. And so I went to the Shalom Zachar in Shaarei Tzedek Hospital, and I was on the 8th floor. If you've ever been there, there's like a big porch. So Friday night, I'm on the porch. It's next to the shul. And I see someone, and I say, you're really, really familiar to me. Where do I know you from? And he said, I don't believe we've ever met, but you probably know me from the news. My name is so-and-so. And it was actually correct. It was a father who lost a child in a very famous terror attack in Israel. And that's where I knew his face from the media. And he is a man of tremendous faith and joy. And I've met many parents and many people that went through the most terrible, difficult, unfathomable struggles, challenges, loss, confusion, injustice. And these people reached for the stars and became the greatest people of faith. And they are so inspiring. And we want to thank them because they give us inspiration every day. And they show us what's possible to do with faith. But coming back and ending, Reb Elchonon says we can't get there if we conveniently tailor our beliefs around what we want to do. then it's for sure not going to work. Thank you guys. Hopefully this was meaningful and can help us to get through what we have to face. Be well.